What's up, everybody? So today I'm back with another one of these philosophy study skills videos. And this one I think is going to be really important. We're going to be tackling how I approach difficult texts. So without further ado, let's get right into that. Again, notes are going to be linked in the video description below. So let's talk about reading. Let's talk about difficult text, approaching them. How do I do it? I'm going to give you some preliminary considerations, and then I'm going to lay out my method, which is just a general method, and you can think about it, modify it if you want, leave a comment below, tell me what you like, what you didn't like. So let's get right into it. Let's take a look at my notes here, because there's some important stuff. So for these preliminary considerations, when selecting a book to read, I want you to be really cognizant of what it's going to require. So novels, for instance, I like the Vince Flynn novels, I've read the Brad Thor novels, the Matthew Riley novels, all these adventure-packed novels. They're fairly easy to read, and they don't require a lot of mental work. You just read along, and your head is really kind of playing a movie. You're just thinking about the characters. You're not sitting and reflecting. So those are going to be a lot different than reading a philosophical text. And when I was getting into philosophy, I didn't realize that. And I approached it as like reading a novel. And that was bad because when I didn't understand something, I thought I was too dumb or that maybe the author wasn't clear enough. No. Reading a text is not like reading a novel. It's going to require a different approach, a different mindset, and lots of different skills. So a book on metaphysics, for instance, is going to require shutting your phone off. It's going to require really focusing, getting into a state of almost flow, if you've heard that. You're going to have to get rid of all the distractions and really grind out your interpretation, what the author's saying, why you think the author is saying that, etc. So also, you're going to have to mentally prepare yourself for whatever text you're going to read. This is really important. So if I'm reading a text, say for instance, last summer I read a large portion of Hegel's Phenomenology. Every time I went to do that, I had to mentally prepare myself for how I was going to do that. I had to sit down and I had to think right before I was going to read, this is going to take a lot of work, I'm going to put in the time, but I'm going to do it. And I had to do that. I had to get in this state where I wasn't just going to sit down and kind of half-ass it, if you want to say that. I was really going to put in the work. So again, difficult texts are really going to challenge you. Averroes, who is a medieval philosopher, actually read Aristotle's Metaphysics 40 times at the very least. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, even the greatest philosophers are reading and rereading. We'll get to that when I mention my method. These are just some considerations up front. So there's really going to be a lot of effort put into these texts. I tackled in my first study skills video how I think that there should be blood, sweat, and tears on the pages, and that's not that big of a metaphor. There really should be a struggle. You're tarrying, as Hegel says, with the texts. So another thing, I use most of my texts as workbooks. So let's take an example. I got some books laying around here. So for instance, I have a copy of Thomas Aquinas's Summa Contra Gentiles, books 1 and 2. And if we flip open to the page, you're going to see that I have tons of notes. I have tons of stuff underlined. I have my own summaries written at the end of paragraphs. I have arguments mapped out in kind of formal logic. I have circles, arrows going all over the place. The point being is that I'm using these texts as a workbook. I'm not just reading them and saying, oh, okay, well, this kind of makes sense, and then I'm moving on. I'm literally using them to write out my own examples in the margins. Another great example, over Christmas break, I read a metaphysics textbook, and I ended up reading it twice, and if you take a look at it, you will see that in the margins, whenever an author the author puts his own example, I would write out my own newer example. And I would also put question marks where I kind of didn't understand something. But the point is that I was using these texts as a workbook. You want to use them and kind of map out your own questions, write your own things in them, write your own thoughts. Use it like a math workbook where you're trying to solve problems. Write out how you think the author solved or failed to solve X problem. So that's going to be very, very good. And again, repetition is key. So when you're doing these things and when you're writing stuff out, underline it a few times, go back to it, look at it again, circle it, look at your example, write out another example, ingrain that material. A few more preliminary things, then we'll move into my method. Next thing is, don't be afraid to drop a book or skim around what interests you. So for instance, right here, I have another text on Thomas Aquinas. And if you look at it, some of the chapters are just completely blank and some of them are clearly red. Well, I got this book a few days ago, and what I've been doing is just going around to the parts that I like, that really interest me. So for instance, I'm interested in the Transcendentals, so I'm reading the Transcendental section. I'm not so interested in metaphysics as theology, so I'm not really reading that portion yet. And again, that's going to be up to you. You're going to want to do that to keep your mind engaged and to really have fun with the texts. I mean, philosophy is about seeking wisdom and it's about having fun, so don't be afraid to skip around. You don't have to read the whole thing. Go to what interests you. Now, with all this stuff in mind, let's add one more thing, actually two more things here. So one thing I do want to mention is something that I learned from my economics degree, and that's the sunk cost fallacy. So when you are watching, say, a movie, and the movie's just horrible, say it's 3 hours long, you're an hour in, and it's just absolutely horrible, you hate it, you want to leave, but you say to yourself, oh, well, I'm this far in, might as well stick it out. That's the wrong attitude to have. That's called the sunk cost fallacy. You're going to want to pick up, get out of that movie theater, move on, and do something more productive with your time. That way, the extra time that you get is going to outweigh the benefit that you would get from actually sitting there and remaining to watch the movie. The same is true of a book. If I'm reading a text and I'm not getting anything out of it, why would I continue to stick with it? Granted, I am putting in the work and I'm really tarrying with it, but maybe it's just not engaging. Maybe it's just not clicking with me yet. Maybe it's just not my area of expertise. Who knows? There are a lot of factors. Granted, assuming you're putting in the work and really trying to, and really tarrying with that thinker, it may just be best to move on. I had this happen the other day. Let's take an example. I was reading portions of this metaphysics book, and I just wasn't getting it. I really spent a lot of time with this text. I don't know if it was just the way the author presented the ideas, but it just wasn't sticking with me. And so I picked up another metaphysics textbook on similar topics, and I've been getting a ton out of that. That's fine. Be wary of that sunk cost fallacy. Last consideration here is your goal is not just to read, but to extract information. Crucial. I can't stress this one enough. Let me give an example. 2 years ago, when I was living at my college during the summertime, I did a lot of reading. My goal was to read at least 2 books a week. It didn't work out very well because I was trying to read so fast and I was so focused on reading, I wasn't actually extracting information. This is going to be very, very important. I remember what books I read, but I don't remember anything about them. I read some C.S. Lewis. I read some Sigmund Freud. I read some economics books. I read some Richard Dawkins. I read a ton of different people, a ton of different thinkers, but I don't remember anything that was said because I was so focused on reading and not extracting the information. Again, crucial. You'd be surprised, but my reading speed is actually very, very, very low. For instance, here we have Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia, and if we flip open to one of the articles, let's say question 2, article 1, and article 2, if I'm reading these, I mean, these are only, article 1 here is 1, 2, 3 pages, and it's going to take me at least an hour to read. And if we look at something like After Virtue, which I've been making videos on, it's going to take me 10 to 30 minutes to read a page. Not because I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't really know what any of this means, and I'm just kind of glazing it over, but I'm trying to work through what the author is saying. I'm trying to weigh my interpretation versus what I think other interpretations are. I'm trying to articulate my own examples. I'm trying to make the text my own. That's what I'm doing. This is crucial. You're not going to remember stuff if you're not doing this. If you're just glazing over the words, you might find a cute little aphorism somewhere, or you might find some little idea that kind of sticks with you, but you're not making the text your own and understanding it. That's huge. That is how I'm able to remember so much of the stuff that I read. Granted, I read a lot slower and I really take my time, but I attempt to study the text, not just read it. I attempt to work with the text and tarry with it. I'm really, really trying to do that. If you look at my copy of After Virtue, you'll literally see sweat stains on the book because I've been sitting there and I'm just flipping through it constantly. In the hot weather, in the cold weather, outside, you'll see just pencil marks everywhere. You'll see pages that are ripping up. I have the metaphysics textbook I read over Christmas, that the cover is actually falling off because I'm just constantly flipping through it. I'm constantly studying it, bending it, trying to make it my own, writing out examples. That is how you learn to do philosophy through reading. You can't just simply read the text and expect to know it. You have to tarry with the negative, as Hegel puts it. Really sit and make that text your own. Work with the thinkers. Try on the thinker's thoughts like they are clothes and go walk a mile in them. That, I think, is the best piece of advice I can give you. So, again, let's now take a look, after those preliminary considerations, at my method here. And again, this is going to differ with different texts. So, for instance, I have, again, these metaphysics books. I have Thomas Aquinas's Summa here, and I have some novels. I also have some works for, like works of popular philosophy. For instance, some of you guys may be a fan of Jordan Peterson. I've read his 12 Rules. Maybe I'll make a video on that. I didn't really like it that much. I've read some of Ben Shapiro's works, read Richard Dawkins. I've read some of Sam Harris. So I've read these popular level thinkers too, and those are going to require a different approach than, say, a Hegel or a Kant or a Plato or a Thomas. So let's take a look at this method here. So the first step is going to be important. And here I'm going to glance through the work and see how it is divided up. Usually, philosophical texts are divided in a way that you can focus on one section at a time. So for instance, here I have this metaphysics textbook. And if you look at it, you're going to see that it's divided up into, each chapter is divided up into subheadings. You're going to have subheading 1, subheading 2, conclusion. I'm going to use this to my advantage, and I'm going to section that off so that I can read them in portions. I don't have to sit down and read a whole text. I can read portion by portion. Say 45 minutes, I'll read this portion, and then I'll come back another day or later that day or something. So this allows me to concentrate on smaller chunks at a time and know, this is crucial again, write this down. It allows me to know where I get lost in the text. So when I section off a text, I'm going to know when my mind is tracking the idea and I lose track, okay, what section did I lose track at? There I can go back, I can make a mark or put a question mark, and I can hone in on that part. So some of you may ask, well, what do you do if a text isn't broken up in a way that's very neat and clean? Well, in that case, you're gonna have to do it yourself. This is where it gets tricky. This is where practice comes in. So for instance, I've had books where I've had to write out, okay, this is a new idea within the paragraph, this is a new idea within the chapter, let's section this off. You can use numbers like 1.1, 1.2, you can use headings like X idea, Y idea, it's up to you, but sectioning off places where ideas are changing and sectioning off portions of a text, it's going to allow you to concentrate on specific areas, and it's going to allow you to keep track of where you lose out on understanding. Huge. That's the first step in the method. Second step, after that, I'm going to do a first read all the way through and just put the text down. So for instance, I've sectioned off chapter 1 in this book, and I've just kind of skimmed it to see what it's about. I haven't done any in-depth reading. I've just, skimmed over it. I may understand 25 to 50%, if that. I may understand nothing. I'm just trying to section off where ideas are going to differ, where the transfer of ideas is going to happen, and all this stuff. And what I'm going to do then on this after that is I'm going to do a full read through the chapter. So I'm going to read this chapter, and I'm going to, it's going to be at a faster pace. I'm not going to understand everything. My aim, if I'm understanding 50% of it, absolutely golden. That's all you want. If it's 25, that's fine. If it's nothing, well, then you've learned something. You know that you got to go read it again. But you really shouldn't understand more than 50% of this first read. And so that's what I'm going to do. So again, this is also because it takes me, some of you may differ, but I think for most people, it takes about 2 months of reading an author to get used to their vernacular, just the way they talk, their vocabulary, their technical terms. In the case of Aquinas, it's going to take you, I've heard people like Barry Miller, who's an Aquinas scholar, he said 10 years to really understand Aquinas. People like Heidegger, it's going to be a similar amount of time. Other thinkers, more contemporaries, like Jordan Peterson maybe, or some of these people like, I don't know, pop culture type philosophers. You can get a hang of what they're saying within a few days. So again, it's going to depend on the thinker. It's going to depend on who you're reading and how much time you're going to put in. And so again, that's just to emphasize my point that a first read through the text, you're not going to understand much, and that's perfectly fine. So third, I'm going to do, this is the third step in the method, I'm going to do a second read of the entire text. And this time I'm aiming to section off parts of the text that section off portions of the text. And again, it's going to be basically a more in-depth repeat of the first step. And so I'm saying, okay, well, are there ideas within my first sectioning of the text that need to be sectioned off further? So for instance, if I'm reading a metaphysics textbook and we're talking about, the author's talking about, I don't know, the A theory of time or the B theory of time, and within that portion, say it's 2 pages, within those 2 pages, this is one large section, maybe he starts talking about Einstein's relativity theory and its relevance to the theories of time, and then he starts talking about our intuitions and their relevance to theories of time. Well, that's going to constitute another section. And so we're going to have an Einsteinian section there, and we're going to have an intuitive section that I'm going to classify it so I can focus on. So there are going to be just examples everywhere in your texts. After Virtue, I've been reading that and making videos. That's a great example. So McIntyre in there is going to have a lot of dense ideas. And so maybe one section is going to constitute 2 sentences, while another section is going to be a whole page. It's just going to be up to you to section off those ideas so that you can, again, go more in depth, keep track of where you lost your understanding, and really start to hone in on interpretation, what the author's saying. So that's the third step. Fourth step is I'm going to do another read all the way through and take notes on the sections I like and jot down the sections that I don't understand. So this is going to be a 4th read of the text, and I'm going to be, with the sections I do understand and that I prefer, I'm going to jot down, okay, well, good stuff, maybe as a note on the side margin or something, I understand this, or maybe write out my own examples, try to make that thinking my own. And there's still going to be some areas where you don't understand. Again, Averroes read Aristotle's Metaphysics 40 times, and there were still areas he didn't understand. So on those areas, I'm just going to put a question mark, and I'm going to try to read them again. I'm going to try to interpret them. I'm going to try to weigh the interpretations. A great example right down here, where is it, is Thomas Aquinas' Summa Contra Gentiles. So if you've ever looked at this, let's take a look here. Chapter 13, it is freaking massive and difficult, and I've probably read it 15 to 20 times now, and there are still portions I have no idea what he's saying. So that's just the nature of philosophy. There are going to be some times like that. But then the areas where I do know what he's saying, I have lots of notes written down, I have my own interpretations, I have everything. So again, going to depend on what you're doing, going to depend on the author, but this is a general strategy. 4th read, section off areas you like, section off areas you don't understand. 5th, I'm going to do another full read. So this is going to be your 5th read of the text. And this time I'm going to focus more on the sections marked in the 4th step that I don't understand. So this is where I'm going to kind of stop for most text, is if I read it 5 times, I should have a very good grasp, and perform this method 5 times, I should have a very good grasp of what the author is saying. So for instance, after Virtue, while I'm filming these videos on it, I'm actually in the process of my 4th read. So I'm going through it and I'm marking off sections I don't like, going more in depth, making the ideas my own, tearing with it again. And while I'm filming these videos, I'm doing that 5th read, and I'm just kind of going through and just saying, okay, well, I don't understand this yet, even after all these reads. Probably won't understand it. Maybe I can ask somebody else for help on their interpretation, or maybe I'll mark out in the video, hey, I don't understand this section. But generally speaking, this 5th read is where you're going to focus on those sections that you don't understand and really hone in what the author's saying. Now, that's my general 5-step method for a text. Like I said, though, it's going to differ. So if you're reading somebody like a Sam Harris or a Christopher Hitchens or somebody of that pop culture philosophy nature, or you're reading maybe Steven Pinker, his work, his popular level work, those books are probably not going to require this method. They may require a skimming, a sectioning off, and then just simply one read. And that's going to be because they're written for a popular culture, and they don't have a lot of technical vocabulary that, say, a Thomas Aquinas or a Heidegger would have. But when I was reading Hegel, for instance, and I was attempting to interpret Hegel's master-slave dialectic, and compare that to Kojelev's interpretation and de Beauvoir's interpretation, when I was doing that, I had to read the text 50 times. I had to go back and really focus on my own interpretations. So this method that I've laid out is going to differ for each thinker. But generally speaking, this is a template with which you can use to approach any philosophical text. Now, let me discuss that, unpack that idea real quick before I recap. So when I study, I'm always attempting to have a template, a sort of framework or method which I can take anywhere and apply. So I'm going to make a video in the future on writing and my method of writing. I'm going to make a video on my method of speaking. I'm going to make a video on my method of test preparation. In all of these areas, I have a template with which I simply apply and I plug in. Say I'm reading Aquinas or I'm reading Hegel or I'm reading Kant or someone. I'm going to apply this template and I'm going to go through these steps, but I might need to amend those. I might need to add in a step 3A, or I may need to do something else. I may need to, for instance, when I read the metaphysics textbook over Christmas break, I actually sat down on my computer and I typed out in a Google Doc how exactly, I typed out some of the author's own words and I tried to rephrase them to make it really my own, to try to wrestle with how exactly is this interpretation working. I also tried to type out my own bullet pointed notes. I tried to type out my own commentaries. I mentioned in another video how I did my own commentary on Aristotle's metaphysics book Zeta. I've done that a few times. When I was reading Hegel, I used Dr. Gregory B. Sadler's videos, and I would take notes on my computer, and then I would go and take handwritten notes watching the video a second time in the actual book, and then I would try to read the text on my own and synthesize everything that I learned. So again, these steps are going to vary with the text that you read, but this is a general template which you can use for your philosophical readings. Now, with all that in mind, let's do a quick recap so you guys don't forget anything, or you all don't forget anything, because I really want you to take this video and use it in your own philosophy courses, whether it be in school or whether it just be studying on your own. I know it's very difficult when you're doing readings as an undergrad or a grad student, and unfortunately what makes it even more difficult is the fact that professors oftentimes don't teach you how to read at all. And so I had to figure this all out on my own. That's why I'm sharing it with you all. So I really want to emphasize that this is a strategy that I've tested, and I want you to test, and I want you to leave some comments below on what you like and what you don't like. How would you change it, whether this has been successful for you. So let's do a quick recap here. I laid out first some preliminary considerations. So I said that when you're selecting a book to read, be cognizant of what it will require. And I gave examples of Thomas Aquinas' Summa. I gave examples of some textbooks on metaphysics, and I gave some examples of novels. All those are going to require different skills. They're going to require different levels of energy. So
you have to mentally prepare yourself for what text you're going to read. Again, if you're reading Kant's Critiques, you're going to need to be a lot more focused, and you're going to have to put away the distractions when comparing that to reading something like J.P. Moreland, who is a more popular, who's done a lot of academic work, but who's written some popular level books. Those two texts are going to require tons of different, they're going to require a lot different preparation, mental preparation, physical preparation even. I forgot to add in that you want to be hydrated, you want your body to be in good shape so that your brain is working properly. So, difficult texts are going to challenge you. That was another thing that I wanted to talk about. Difficult texts are going to make you sometimes cry. I mean, I've talked with kids in my classes in high school, I've talked with peers in college, I've talked with people in graduate school who get really, really frustrated. I mean, I've even gotten so frustrated that I've just like slammed the book down, gotten up and gone to work out, or I've gotten up and just put it down for a day or two. It's going to happen. Texts are going to challenge you, but don't be scared, don't be worried. They challenged me. Averroes read Aristotle's Metaphysics at least 40 times. That's just how it is. So, again, another consideration was I used most of my texts as workbooks. I'm always trying to tarry with the thinker's thought. I'm trying to engage with the thinker. I'm trying to write out my own examples. I'm trying to underline certain key phrases. I'm trying to draw arrows to what connects to what. I'm drawing diagrams to help me understand the grammar of the sentence. I'm using arrows to look at my referential phrasing that's in the paragraphs. All sorts of things. I'm engaging with the text, and I'm trying to make it my own. And you think of it as a math workbook. You're trying to write out problems. You're trying to solve things in the text. That's how I look at it. So again, last two things for these considerations. Don't be afraid to drop a book and just be like, you know what, I just don't like it anymore. I'm not engaged. I've tried my hardest. I'm not getting anything out of it. Maybe I'll come back to it later. I've done it before. I'm going to do it in the future. It happens. And also, don't be afraid to skim around what interests you in the book. Again, I gave an example of this short little text on Aquinas' Metaphysics. You know, I'm interested in the Transcendentals. I'm not quite interested in his kind of technical argumentation engaging with commentary on Boethius about whether metaphysics it collapses into theology, stuff like that. I'm not really engaged with that. I'm working with other things for now, at least in this point in time. So I'm going to go and study those things because ultimately you're trying to pursue wisdom and you're trying to have fun with this stuff. So don't be afraid to skim around. Next thing is sunk cost fallacy. You just gotta know when to give up, honestly. You gotta know when to say, listen, this is not worth my time anymore. I'm going to drop it. For me, I've tried reading some thinkers. So for instance, I tried reading some Lacan, and it just wasn't worth my time at that place in my life. I'm going to come back to him because I do think he has a lot of very interesting insights, but I just didn't have the time with the classes and with my other projects to put in the effort to read Lacan. Another example would be Badiou. I spent a lot of time trying to tarry with Badiou's thinking, and it just wasn't worth what I was putting into it. So I switched to working on Hegel, and that was what I did last summer. So that was a very, very good decision. Another thing, for instance, I tried working a lot with Kant. I read a large portion of his third critique, and I just didn't like it. I just didn't like his style. I just didn't like what I was doing. I wasn't getting enough out of it. And so I just said, you know what, I'm just going to move on. I'm going to start working on Alexander Kojève. And so that's what I did. And you just have to know when to give up, essentially. And you can come back to these thinkers later. You can come back to these texts. But if you're not getting something out of it and you're putting in the work, it sometimes is better to move on. So, all those preliminary things in mind, let's recap my approach. So I'm going to do basically 5 reads at the very minimum of an important text. Again, popular level work, articles in the Wall Street Journal or something, these aren't going to require 5 reads. This is a general template. You can modify it how you want. I just want to give you a basic strategy that you can make your own. So first skim through is going to be, again, basically a skim where I'm sectioning off the text, looking for where there are paragraph breaks, looking for where ideas are breaking, kind of getting a lay of the land, a lay of the author's vocabulary. Not going to allow me or I'm not going to understand pretty much anything at this point. I'm just really trying to look at what's going on in the text. Are there any diagrams, for instance? Look at the footnotes, maybe. Second read, I'm going to do a full read through, and I'm going to understand very little at this point, but I'm trying to get used to the author's writing style. Maybe I'll jot down a few things. I'm just trying to really read through the whole text to kind of get a feel, a lay of the land. If I understand 25 to 50%, at this point, it's successful. Third, I'm going to do another read, and I'm going to aim at sectioning off portions in a more detailed manner than I first did on the skim. Again, very important. This may mean that I'm sectioning off 2 sentences. It may mean I'm sectioning off 2 pages. Going to depend on the text a lot. Fourth, I do another read all the way through, and I note the sections that I like and the sections that I don't like. This is going to allow me to focus in on making the author's thought my own, really trying on their ideas. I'm going to be able to say, hey, look, this paragraph, I understand it fully. Here are 2 interpretations. I think this one's plausible because of this reason. Something like that. Here are my own examples. Here's another paragraph on the following page. I just don't understand anything about this. Let's leave this for another time. Maybe something else later on in the book will help me understand it better. That's going to be the 4th step. 5th step, I'm going to do another full read, this time focusing on those sections I don't understand and really attempting to interpret them and fit them into the work as a whole. And so that's going to be a general 5-step method. Recap, again, depending on the text, you may need to do a 10th step or something. But overall, this is a template. It's a method with which you can make your own. You can amend it. I want you to really apply it in your philosophy classes. And I want you to tell me what you think, because again, this is a skill that so few people learn and a skill that is simply not taught in courses. So without further ado, let's close this, let's wrap this up. So please like, subscribe, leave a comment below, let me know what you thought. Hopefully this stuff is helpful. It's how I read. And next time we're going to be talking about another philosophy study skill.